Wendell, happy Mother's Day weekend. Thank you for listening to Daughters of Mother Earth. We are your hosts, Jessica and Stacy. Before we begin, I would like to introduce Stacy Reese, our new co-host. Stacy, do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, hi everyone. My name is Stacy, and I am Chinateca, Zapoteca, queer, born and raised in the San Gabriel Valley. And I want to thank Jessica for welcoming me on the show. I'm really excited to be a part of this new project and can't wait to see where it goes.
Yeah, thank you for joining. And then before we continue, I would like to take this time to acknowledge the lands that we're standing on today. We're currently recording this first podcast in Seattle, which are Duwamish lands. So a shout out to the Duwamish people who are still here, taking care of the lands and making sure Seattle recognizes them. So yeah, Stacy. So what are we talking about today?
So today we're going to be doing more of a Mother's Day theme episode, and we're going to be talking about the role that women play in our communities, mothers, how this comes into play with diaspora, and non-traditional motherhood and queer motherhood.
Cool. Do you have a question for the podcast? Or?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So the first question is, what role do women play in our communities?
Okay. So based on my experience, and I think we were talking before we started recording, is that in the Zapotec community, we are a matriarchal society, which can mean a lot of things, right? And basically in my community of Juchitan, Oaxaca, being the matriarch of the household means that you're the one kind of leading the finances. You're the one that's making decisions for the entire family. And basically what I have seen in my family is that, men kind of have a different role than most men do in society in general, because patriarchy is not as relevant. So for instance, when we're having dinner, instead of serving the men first, that I have heard a lot, that a lot of other communities do, we served our elders first, especially our matriarchs, and then we serve everybody else, right? And then another thing that I have seen through my family is that even though we are a matriarchal society, there's some tendencies of patriarchy that have infiltrated our communities, just because all of Mexico is a patriarchal settler community. So it's kind of interesting to see that. What about you? What have you seen in your family?
Right, that's very interesting because I have a Oaxacan and a Chinantec and Zapotec family. So in my Oaxacan side, we serve the children first. We make sure that our youth are taken care of, and then goes the women, and then I don't think there's a super huge emphasis on which gender is served first. It's probably guests that go second after the children, so something like that. And in terms of my Chinantec and Zapotec family, it also mirrors that. It's guests, children, and then women, men. Yeah. But it's interesting that you mentioned how the Zapotec Nation is a matriarchal society. I grew up with a predominantly Chinantec family because our pueblo is originally a Chinantec pueblo. We called ourselves Tzetmumo. And then after the Mexican Revolutionary War, my grandparents and uncles who are Zapotec came into the town and were welcomed by our Chinantec relatives. So that's how it became the Chinantec Zapotec Society. But the church has definitely had a role in bringing more of a patriarchal infiltration into our dynamics, because I do see that. But irregardless, I still think, I know actually that both the men, women, and queer folks in our community play very important roles when it comes to decision making, taking care of the finances, both here and in our towns, of our children, family, and other responsibilities.
Oh, wow, that's interesting because, like you mentioned, church, right? So, like, I feel like a lot of like the communities in the Zapotec region, we are Católicos, just because we abide
Mm-hmm.
to that the rules, and even within the religion, like it's very male dominated, and like to be high up there, like a priest, you have to be a male, like not necessarily identify as a male,
Mm-hmm.
but be a male, based on how society perceives you. And I feel like that's very interesting because like how do you think that we have like in a way adapted that religion to fit our matriarchal needs or like our rules and regulations? Do you have an example that you can think of or
Mm-hmm. How we have adopted that? Well, in our town, with the bringing of the church, a lot of men are heads of the council or part of the council. There's not a lot of women. However, more recently in our hometown association here in the San Gabriel Valley, we do have more women. I think there's like 2 or 3 who are now part of the council, and I think it's the first time in I don't know how many years. I would say like at least 40 years that women are have a seat or have a chair in that council. But in terms of the women back home, I guess the way we resist or don't abide by those gender dynamics imposed by the church, the cis heteropatriarchal ones, is through the course of migration when it's usually the men who migrate out when they do migrate. The women are in charge of the cargoes, which is like service to the town, head of the household, not just taking care of the children, but also potentially making large decisions involving finances, land and resources, things like that.
oh wow, interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I mean, for my family, since my mom is Zapotec and my dad is Chorti Maya from El Salvador, I feel like
Mm-hmm.
my dad does abide to the matriarchal, regulations and rules that our family and community has in place. But obviously, it's
Mm-hmm.
like sometimes he does have some patriarchal tendencies, like, like he expects women to perform certain norms or roles like washing the dishes, cooking. So I feel like it's very interesting because like my dad a veces he adapts to the surrounding environment that he's at. So like if we were
Right.
back in my family's home, he knows when to shut up because sometimes I feel like men take, because of patriarchy, men think that they can tell a woman what to do and how to do it all the
Right.
time. At least for my region, the Oaxaca and Juchitan, like you don't tell a woman what to do. Domestic violence is not really. It is high, but it's usually because based on the statistics that I recently read, it's done by people outside of the community. And it's very interesting because even when we, como se dice, relate it back to the missing and murdered Indigenous women, the statistics show that a lot of the Indigenous women of Canada and the United States are actually murdered by people outside of their community. So, it's very interesting to see that even in matriarchal societies, non Indigenous men or women as well are the ones that enforce this violence towards our Indigenous women, even though sometimes people don't want to admit it. That still happens in
Yeah.
Mexico. Um, so, yeah, that's very interesting to read those stats. So another
Yeah.
question that we had was like what role do non-binary and queer folks play in our society?
Right. Did you want to answer that, or you want me to answer that first?
Like you can go first or
Okay. Yeah. So, yeah, the topic of the LGBTQI plus community within our communities and queer motherhood. I think that is a very good topic to talk about because I feel like a lot of times the LGBTQIA plus community is overlooked, silenced, antagonized, and other things like that. I think really quick, going back to the role that the Catholic Church has played in our communities and cis heteropatriarchy, I think that I think it's really great that such a strong matriarchal society still exists in Juchitán, like you said, Jessica. But unfortunately, that is not the case for I don't know how many other pueblos, but a significant amount, including my own, because there is a huge stigma against queer, trans, two-spirit, and LGBTQIA folks in our communities. Actually, our town is really small, so I haven't heard of that many of us who are out. Even here, there's not I don't know if there's really a lot of people who are out. Well, specifically within my town, hometown association. But, I mean, I am, so, hey. And queer motherhood is also a topic I wanted to talk about today, because I can speak on it mostly from the Oaxacan side, not so much from the Chinantec or Zapotec side, because I haven't really seen that, or not in terms of anybody that I know is out on that end. But yeah, I think it's important to recognize the queer LGBTQIA plus or two-spirit mothers we have in our communities, because I feel like a lot of times, or at least within my community, they're treated differently. They often get a lot of hassle and unnecessary comments or expectations placed upon them, such as questions like, why don't you have a man? Why aren't you married to a dude if they're lesbian, or bisexual if they are a queer partner? Or you're doing motherhood wrong if you're not with a cis hetero man. And that's actually, that's honestly not true. I feel like it should be common sense. And I think that in queer mothers really owning their identities, their queerness, and showing their children their confidence in that is actually very healthy and nurturing for the child's spirit. Showing them that they should not be afraid to embrace who they really are and honor that in themselves, even if society doesn't want us to do that. But yeah, those are just some of my thoughts on that.
Oh, okay. Well, based on my experiences, I have had a lot of uncles who identify as muses, which means that they're two-spirited. And basically, for our community, they're known as a blessing, because because they're sons, but at the end of the day, they also have that feminine identity. But I feel like the reason why maybe a lot of men do not want to come out, especially men in this scenario, is because my uncles have been murdered just because of the activisms they have led, or the advocacy they have led for the musas to be recognized throughout of Mexico. Just because Mexico, there is a lot of homophobia that's still prevalent, just because religion, as you mentioned, has a big role in the in this settler colonial society as well. And unfortunately, I feel because once you come out, you kind of have to, that's why a lot of my relatives, who even the ones that have been murdered for their activism, never call their work activism, because they feel like it's a means of survival for them to even exist as, muses, queer folks. So it's very interesting to see that, because I mean, the family's loss is very hard to endure, and even to this day we're still grieving, just because they were not old, they were still young. And for our relatives who are older from that generation, to see them be murdered and die, it's a little bit difficult, right? Because I seen it. I seen my my eldest aunt suffer a lot from it just because, she's like, oh, I'm the older one. I wanted to like, I wanted them to bury me, not the other way around. So it's, this violence, this homophobia that's enacted through, killing people is very difficult to see or live through. So I can imagine why a lot of people don't want to come out.
Yeah, yeah, that's very real, and I'm sorry that that has happened to your family. My condolences to you all. It's it's really painful to see the impact that European settler and extractive colonialism has had on our communities, and how cisgender, heteronormative patriarchy is one of those outcomes. Um, so yeah, it makes a lot of places unsafe for us, and even me, like I still haven't really come out to my town. Granted, most of us here, like the youth, are the ones who listen to podcasts or English speakers, but one day that day will come for me as well. And um, yeah, I think one of the things that I feel personally responsible for is also challenging these cisgender heterosexual patriarchal norms within myself, and hopefully, making more space for our youth to feel safe, to feel confident, um, to embrace who they are, if it's not, within that cis hetero um, mold. And because heteronormativity actually is not natural, it's not something organic, indigenous to, or at least to my community. Contrary to most opinions, it is not. It's a foreign concept that was introduced to us, so we have to eradicate that.
And I feel like that's how como se dice, like patriarchy, even though like we are still a matriarchal society in the Zapotec nation, has infiltrated, because even though like we like some families still accept their, muses, their two-spirited men who identify as they or them, like there's still
Mm-hmm.
that, like, homophobia, those slurs, just because like just my memories of my uncles, like, there was a lot of like anti LGBTQ, like homophobic slurs or phrases that were used against them, even while, where we were like going out in Mexico. So like as a little girl, I didn't understand it, because sometimes you don't understand what's going on around you, especially when you're like a child. But now growing up,
Yeah.
you realize that it was homophobia, and it was that antagonizing like queer folks, and especially men, right? Because they use like a lot of slurs against men, especially since my uncles were very like gender fluid in the way they dress. Like, for the Zapotec nations, like las mujeres, the women are the ones that wear our regalia, that is like our
Right.
tejuanas, which Frida Kahlo
Mm-hmm.
appropriated. But, the men
Okay.
also use it. So,
Uh huh.
like, especially if they're
Yes, you tell
queer.
me.
Yeah.
Right.
Mm.
That's beautiful.
Yeah. But,
That's beautiful.
yeah, it's sad to see
Mm-hmm.
them gone. And sometimes, I remember them, and, like people write articles, and I'm like, oh, I don't want to see them, but like read the articles, because, loss is hard for us, especially as indigenous folks. Like, I feel like we're used, it's kind of sad because sometimes we become numb when we lose our relatives, just because it's very common in our society, especially if our relatives are outspoken, si son mujeres, y si son queer, because they're targets, ¿verdad?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But I feel like my uncles, like, they were kind of like an aunt, ¿verdad? Like, cause they will spoil me, like they would do my hair, like they would dress me up when we had like like certain events where we had to wear our Tejuana dress, just because our
Right.
dresses are so heavy. um,
That's beautiful.
yeah, so like that's how I feel like the queer folks in my family played a role in like motherhood as well, because like you usually associate those things with mom, like, oh, they're your caretakers, they're gonna do your makeup. But for me, since my mom never wears makeup, like it was my uncles who were doing my makeup all the time. So yeah.
That is so cute. Oh
Yeah.
my gosh, that's lovely.
So
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, I feel like gender gender or like cis hetero gender norms were very much broken in my family too, is which is like a really healing thing. I think a lot of times people talk about healing from colonialism and capitalism and you know the European things that Europeans brought. But I think that in order to do that, one of the things we have to do is really decolonize our view of gender, sexuality, motherhood, and do away with these cis hetero patriarchal norms that have been imposed upon us. So that's really important. And I think whenever that type of toxicity is broken, I feel like my relationships with people grow, and it just becomes a healthier, more comfortable environment. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because I mean,
Yeah.
cuando hablamos de like decolonize, we always talk about like decolonizing the entire system, right? Like settler colonialism. But like you mentioned, settler colonialism has like embedded so many layers onto us that's important to address the smaller layers that are more connected to ourselves before we can go out to decolonize the system, right? Because it's so many layers that it's embedded on us after
Right.
colonialism. Wow.
Yeah. Yeah. It's very personal. And thank you for sharing all of your beautiful stories with us. I think it's really lovely, and I'm sure not a lot of people have heard about a lot of experiences like ours. So I'm glad that we get to share that here as well.
Yeah, thank you. So I just wanted to read off one of our viewers who wants to send their mom, like a shout out. So
Mm-hmm.
at Sun Kills Moon, they tweeted, gracias por hacer lo mejor que puedes con lo que tienes, mamá. Marta Luna Trejo, siempre serás amada. She really is the foundation of our family, and our success come from her. So thank you at Sun Kills Moon for tweeting this beautiful message to your mom, and we hope your mom can read it out and like listen to it. Yeah.
Oh, that's beautiful. Thank you for sending us that. Hopefully she gets to hear that.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So, do you have another question, Stacy, for our podcast today, or?
Yeah. Okay. So what role do mothers play in our communities while in diaspora, and also while men have left their homes in search of a better life?
Oh wow, that's a tough question. Yeah. um. So I mean, I can start. So basically, diaspora. Okay, so it's very interesting for my family dynamics just because my dad ended up in Oaxaca, because as a child, because he was escaping the civil war in El Salvador in Central America.
Mm-hmm.
So it's interesting because like cuando mi papá se venía at the United States, very easily when it was easy to just cross the border, and then he will work here for a certain time, then go back to Oaxaca because I feel like he had built a sense of community. He probably gained a mother, a father there just because his father passed away when he was young. His mom, well, he had to leave his family and come with my younger uncle because children at a certain age were just forced to fight in the Civil War. So for my family in particular, when my parents decided to get together, my mom was the one that left her entire community and family to come with my dad. And they were making the decision of whether they were going to stay in the United States or go to Canada, just because Canada was the first country before the U.S. to offer asylum to Central Americans during the Civil War. Entonces, my mom was never, the only way she was left back alone was when my dad was here working a little bit and then going back. And I guess he had told my mom that he wanted her to come here, and she was making that decision. So, like, my mom nunca se quedó in Oaxaca by herself, because I feel like my dad kind of like se la robó. We always joke que se la robó, just because, you know, she's like the only one from her family that's here. Um,
Wow.
so yeah, so you know, in diaspora, I will say that she still plays the role. It's kind of hard, right? Because like, you know, when my relatives pass on or they're murdered or something happens in the family, like she has no one to rely on here, just because everybody's back home. Entonces, in diaspora, I feel like she has grown to be a little bit more resilient. Um,
Right.
like I know society tells our men, or you know, those who identify as men, not to be emotional, like you know, emotional.
Mhm.
And I feel like my mom, in a way, she's taking on that role. Like she does show emotion, but she's always afraid that she's gonna look weak to us somehow. So yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
Hmm.
That's very interesting. I feel like that's also a little bit different from my story as well. Except for the fact that I feel like the mothers have definitely become more resilient here because of the different challenges and the migration that we face. But the role of mothers in the pueblo when the men migrate out is yeah, I think migration was seen as a very difficult journey, and and it was a few of my uncles who were the first to migrate out of our town, which then led to a bigger mass migration. And yeah, I think I had mentioned this before that the women took on very important roles. Before the roles are very much like the women taking care of like the domestic parts of the homes, raising the children, making the food, huge culture bearers as well, or culture makers. And after like the 80s or 90s when a lot of the men came, a lot of the mothers stayed home by themselves with the children. So it was being the head of the household, raising the kids, you know, making sure that they're well fed, taking care of the farms because we're very agriculture based society in our town. So planting season, taking care of that, harvesting season, taking care of that, helping each other, helping the other women around them. If their partners are not home to help or their husbands. And men also are responsible for carrying out specific physical labor services and other cargoes like that. So they would take that on as well. And in some cases, I think men are able to pay or provide a compensation to make up for that labor that is lost because we're very how do you say dependent on each other to survive. So anytime somebody leaves, it has a huge impact on us. And with that being said, there were some women who did. There are now. There have been more women who have migrated out of the town and established their families here. So they take on that role of working, finding jobs here, whether it be secretaries, going to college, fast food, restaurants, different kinds of occupations. And yeah, it varies from family to family. So yeah, that's kind of a bit of what ours looks like.
Yeah, and I like how you mentioned that, you know, a lot of women are taking on like going to college and things like that because I feel like the number of us indigenous women from Oaxaca, like entering higher academia is increasing, and that's like a beautiful thing to see. Because like I didn't know you until I met you via Twitter, so
Yeah.
so it's very interesting, ¿verdad? Because like if one of us is being harassed or like, como se dice, like experiencing certain things, like we will
Yeah.
come through, like no matter if we don't know them, you know, because
Yes,
yeah.
yeah, yeah. I totally feel that. I feel like there were some like tweets or threads that brought more like Oaxacan Twitter together. So now we're more like centralized, and now I feel like it's also becoming bigger with like Southern Indigenous Twitter. I don't know if you've seen that too.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
but
because, you know, and that's another role that we as women play, right? Like, we will stick together no matter what. Like, I remember,
yeah,
you know, like our moms, like, if our tia might be wrong because, you know, somehow she got in trouble, like, the whole crew, the mujeres, will come through for her and, you know, protect her, support her, even if she's wrong. And I feel like that's a
yeah,
beautiful thing that as women, like the role that we play in our moms, like they have passed that on to us. And I feel like even though we're in diaspora, we still have those tendencies
yeah.
of like protecting our own women. Our men, you know, we always
Definitely.
like they can fend for themselves, but when it comes to a mujer, we're like, no, like we will protect them. So that's like I guess one of the teachings my mom taught me, that even though, you know, she doesn't have family here, but because that sense of community, like she's made her own family from other Chinatec who are actually work where she works. Because there is a lot of like,
Oh, okay.
yeah, Oaxacans, like indigenous from Oaxaca who work with her. Because they make like they work for this, como se dice, like they make dog, what is it, like treats, like cookies and stuff. And like
Oh,
she's built
cute.
her own community. So I feel like that's something she's taught me, that you always protect your sisters, even if you're not blood related, but you know, because we are related by community, we protect each other and you know, support one another. So that's a beautiful thing that you mentioned that, because that's just reminded me of like the role we as women play, that we're always
Uh-huh.
taking each other back, and then even in diaspora we do that. So
Yeah, yeah, definitely. That's beautiful. I feel like I don't, I don't know. I feel like the same messages were conveyed to me in different ways, but definitely it's always been the women who are out here, like protecting, defending each other. As yeah, that's important, and it shows. It shows a lot.
yeah.
Hmm. Yeah. Did you have another question you want to go through?
But I guess those were all the questions we had for today. I mean, like, we can end off with like, what are you doing for Mother's Day? Because I know we celebrated on the 10th, so it feels like a week long celebration. So, what did
Yeah.
you do with your mom and the, you know, matriarchs in your family?
Myself.
Yeah.
Um, so we celebrated it on Friday, and everybody has a day off. And we got together at my grandma's house. Oh shoot, I still have to text some people Happy Mother's Day. But technically it's still Mother's Day because it's the American Mother's Day. But yeah, we celebrated on Friday, and yeah, we just got together to have a big meal and share space with each other, share stories, little achievements here and there, and yeah, it was a good time. It was a good time. What about you?
Well, because I'm currently in school, I wasn't able to fly to where my mom lives, which is Arkansas. And I live in
Uh huh.
Seattle. So I just sent her this
Oh,
big
okay.
box of like just like snacks from Seattle, like you know, some nuts are in season. So I sent her that, and I sent her some huaraches that I embroidered something in front of them. And entonces I sent
Wow.
her a lot of things, and she was like, "Oh, mija, like I'm getting too old to wear huaraches." But I'm like, "Mom, no," you know, because like their feet hurt nowadays when they get older. But yeah, and
Yeah.
then my mom has been my brother and my dad are with her, so she's been trying to like have them take her out to eat. And then my dad, it was funny because today le dijo, "You're not a gabacha, so today's not Mother's Day for you."
Oh my
Yeah,
god!
yeah, because
Wow.
that's how my parents joke. Entonces mi mom was like,
Yeah.
"Well, it's still Mother's Day," and like because I send my mom something, I send my dad something too because I feel like my parents now that they're older, they're kind of reverting back to those like I don't want to call them child, but like those tendencies that if somebody gets a gift, the other one doesn't, then one of them is like se resiente. Entonces,
Yeah.
yeah.
It's like a family thing.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
I try to like also send my dad some stuff too, and because of their health, like it's interesting because I can pick out snacks because I live in Seattle, which is more of like that,
Uh-huh.
como se dice, like healthy area where you have like kale chips and all this weird stuff. So I was able to send them some
Uh-huh.
snacks, and I hope they liked it. So yeah,
Yeah, that's good.
yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so thank you everyone for listening to our podcast. Daughters of Mother Earth focuses on Indigenous women and queer kinships with Mother Earth, and then we also discuss other topics that impact Indigenous women. So thank you for listening to us. I'm Jessica Hernandez and Stacy Reese. Do you have anything else to say or last minute comments?
Yeah, it was really fun recording this first episode, and I feel like I'm getting the hang of it. I've never done a podcast before. Just kind of nervous, but I'm really happy that we're out here and doing this kind of work. So I'm excited to keep it up.
Yeah, and thank you for joining because I feel like when I was doing it by myself, it's just like me talking, me going on a
Yeah,
rant,
thank
like
you
my
for
brother
reaching
told me.
out.
Yeah. Entonces, I guess to finish this podcast, we're gonna play A Esa Mujer by Mariachi Ellie. And it's like dedicated to all the mujeres, the women, the queer, non-binary folks who take on the mother role. And also, I want us to take this time to also reflect on the mothers that are suffering at the border as we speak today. Those women who decided to join the caravan, who are indigenous peoples from Central America to gain a better life for their children, and those moms who are suffering because their children have been taken away from them. I want us to keep them in mind in our prayers, in our good energy, good medicine, because that's painful to see that, and it kind of brings like a bittersweet note to this Mother's Day because it's like the first Mother's Day that something like children being separated from moms has always been a thing, but this is the
Right.
year where we see this like increase in numbers.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. With that note, definitely be reflecting on that and seeing how we can put our intentions into action as well, building solidarity with one another, and hoping that we can make positive change in these kinds of issues.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well,
Okay.
thank you for joining us, and we hope you like this music dedicated to all the mujeres and moms. A Esa Mujer by Mariachi Ellie. Thank you for listening
Uh-huh.
to Daughters of Mother Earth, and we hope you enjoy this episode. And please follow us on Twitter, and now we have an Instagram. And